Hi everyone, Simon here from Audio Imperia. In this video I'll be covering how to use the sample start controller, as well as giving you some insights into our editing process when building libraries and how the two relate. First let's talk about editing. All samples in Nucleus, including legato transitions and release samples, are meticulously edited to ensure that patches will play realistically and consistently in time. We could edit samples using essentially a gate, simply cutting each sample at the start of its waveform. However, editing samples in this way results in a patch that has timing inconsistencies. Instead, we listen to every single sample in the library and shift it either earlier or later until it sounds perfectly in time with the click. We refer to this point where a sample sounds in time with the click as the sync point. If we were to cut each sample exactly at the sync point, we'd be losing some very important audio content, as samples missing that audio that comes just before the sync point can sound abrupt and unnatural. Instead, we cut every sample a fixed amount of time before the sync point. This audio between the start of a sample and the sync point is referred to as padding or pre-padding. In the case of Nucleus, this pre-pad amount is 250 milliseconds. When used in a patch, samples with generous pre-padding will sound the most natural, but will introduce noticeable latency. In the case of Nucleus, that added latency is exactly 250 milliseconds, since that's the length of the padding we added to the samples. While this is normal and in fact intentional, playing a patch with 250 milliseconds of latency can be rather difficult. This is where the sample start controller comes in. It allows you to choose where samples will start playing back from, hence the name. In the case of Nucleus, the controller goes from 250 milliseconds before the sync point, which is labeled negative 250 milliseconds, right up to the sync point itself, which is 0 milliseconds. By setting sample start, you can adjust how tight or loose a patch will be. A sample start value closer to 0 results in a tighter patch, meaning it has lower latency but lacks realism. Attacks, legato transitions, and releases sound very abrupt and unnatural. A sample start value closer to negative 250 results in a looser patch, meaning it has higher latency, but is much more realistic. Attacks, legato transitions, and releases all remain intact. So how do we recommend using the sample start controller? Here's a proposed workflow. When recording MIDI, set sample start to 0 milliseconds. This will cause the patch to sound a little unnatural and abrupt, but will virtually eliminate latency. Once you're done recording, for playback, set sample start to a larger value. We recommend a setting of negative 125 milliseconds. This will introduce a latency of 125 milliseconds, which should then be compensated for. For latency compensation, try either shifting your MIDI items earlier in time by 125 milliseconds, or if your DAW supports it, applying a negative 125 millisecond MIDI offset. This will keep your original recordings in time, but attacks, legato transitions, and releases will be much more realistic. Here, negative 125 is of course just an example, and we encourage you to experiment and adjust this setting to your liking. Just make sure that whatever value is displayed on the sample start controller is the value you're using for latency compensation. We've set sample start to negative 125 milliseconds as default for all patches, as we find the setting to be the best compromise between playability and realism. If you just want fast, immediate response from the library, we've provided tight patches where sample start is set to 0 milliseconds by default. Still, we highly encourage you to try the workflow proposed here, as it allows you to best use the library to its full potential. I hope this video was educational and helped explain why we include a sample start controller in our libraries. We also have a small write-up covering most of what was covered in this video, which you can find in the Nucleus manual, which can be downloaded from the Nucleus product page on our website. So that's all for now, and thanks very much for watching.